Hello everyone. Today we are going to read a story that is The Snake and the Mirror. This is a humorous story which is written by Waikum Muhammad Bashir. Mr. Bashir was a Malayalam fiction writer and he was a humanist, freedom fighter, a novelist and a short story writer. His style was very down to earth, and it is this style of writing which made him popular not just among the readers but as well as critics. He is India's one of the most famous and outstanding writers. And in this story, as the name suggests, the two important things are the snake and the mirror. We see how a doctor who uh, who is very who admires his beauty a lot, how he finds himself in a situation where a snake is coiled around him, and it is at that moment he realizes how feeble he is, and the snake spares him only when it itself is enamored by its beauty, when it sees itself in the mirror, that is, when it sees its reflection. So, this chapter also tells us how we humans are very vain. There's a concept of vanity here as well as our apprehensions. It also talks about how in the need of help, we turn to God. Every time we face a crisis, we turn to God for His help. So let's begin. Before you read, do you like to look at yourself in the mirror? What do you think about at such times? Have you ever seen a dog, a cat, or a bird look into a mirror? What do you think it sees? Now read this humorous story about a doctor, a snake, and a mirror. As I told you, it begins with the doctor who is coiled by a snake, and the snake spares him just because there is a mirror and it is enamored by its own beauty. So let's begin with the story. This story is a narrative within a narrative. We get to know the story. It has been told to the narrator by somebody. So let's begin and see what exactly it is and what events take place in the story. It begins with a question, that is, has a snake ever coiled itself round any part of your body? A full-blooded cobra. All of us fell silent. The question came from the homeopath. The topic came up when we were discussing snakes. We listened attentively as the doctor continued with his tale. We get to know that this question of have you ever seen a snake coil itself around any body part, and the snake is a full-blooded cobra. This question came up in a discussion and it was raised by a homeopath, that's a doctor who practices homeopathy. It is a form of medicine, and all the participants here were listening to the doctor very attentively because they wanted to know how he landed himself in the situation and what might have followed after he found himself in this particular situation. So the story begins with, it was a hot summer night, about 10 o'clock. So it is night time and the time in the clock is 10 o'clock. I had my meal at the restaurant and returned to my room. I heard a noise from above as I opened the door. The sound was a familiar one. One could say that the rats and I shared the room. I took out my box of matches and lighted the kerosene lamp on the table. So we get to know that this doctor had his meal at the restaurant and he returned to his room. And the moment he opened the door, he heard a noise, and it was a similar one because he says that the room that he lived in, there he shared it with rats. It was a room full of rats, and at that moment he took out a matchbox and lighted a kerosene lamp that was kept on the table. There must have been a table in the room on top of which was a kerosene lamp, and the doctor lighted it with the help of a matchstick. The house was not electrified. It was a small rented room. I had just set up medical practice and my earnings were meager. I had about 60 rupees in my suitcase. Along with some shirts and dhotis, I also possessed one solitary black coat which I was then wearing. So we get some information about the doctor here, and the reason why he had to light the kerosene lamp is because his house was not electrified. That is, it did not have electricity, and it was a small room and it was a rented one. So he says that since he had just started his medical practice, his earnings were meager. That is, he wasn't earning a lot, it was small quantity. So this shows that his medical practice right now was a sluggish one, as he did not make a lot of profit. And he said that he only had 60 rupees in his suitcase. He did not have more than that. This shows that he was poor. And along with that, what he possessed is what he had in his possession were some shirts, dhoti, and one solitary black coat. Solitary is just one single black coat, and this also he was wearing at that time. So if a question is asked about which things did the doctor own, we could say that he owned some shirts and dhotis. Along with that, he had just one solitary black coat. And now the doctor says that I took off my black coat, white shirt, and not so white vest and hung them up. I opened the two windows in the room. It was an outer room with one wall facing the open yard. It had a tiled roof with long supporting gables that rested on the beam over the wall. There was no ceiling. There was a regular traffic of rats to and from the beam. I made my bed and pulled it close to the wall. I lay down, but I could not sleep. I got up and went out to the veranda for a little air, but the wind god seemed to have taken time off. So he is building up some background before he moves on and tells us how he found snake in his room. So he tells us that he had taken off his black coat, the one black coat he owned, and he was wearing a white shirt and a vest, and this vest was not so white. After taking them off, he hung them up. After that, he opened two windows that were there in the room, and he said that it was an outer room with one wall facing the open yard. So one of the walls was facing the open yard, and it was an outer room. It had tiled roof with supporting gables. They rested on a beam over the wall. So the gable is an upper part of a wall below a sloping roof. He says the regular traffic of rat, it means that there is a continuous movement of rats on the beam. When he made his bed, he pulled it close to the wall and he tried sleeping. He lay down on the bed and he tried sleeping, but he could not. So he decided to get up and go out in the veranda for a little air, but he found that the wind god had taken time off. That means the god must have taken a holiday, as there was no breeze at all. It was so very hot that night that he couldn't sleep, nor could he feel or sense any air, because in his opinion, the wind god seemed to have taken a holiday. He seems to have taken some time off. I went back into the room and sat down on the chair. I opened the box beneath the table and took out a book, the Materia Medica. I opened it at the table on which stood the lamp and a large mirror. A small comb lay beside the mirror. So when he couldn't sleep, he couldn't enjoy himself out in the veranda, he decided to come back inside the room and he sat on the chair. When he sat on the chair, he opened a book. He took out a book from a box which was kept underneath or beneath the table. The book was Materia Medica, that is something related to medical. He opened it and kept it on the table, the same table where there was a lamp and there was a large mirror. Next to this, beside is next to this mirror, there was a comb. There was a small comb as well. He says one feels tempted to look into a mirror when it is near one. I took a look. In those days, I was a great admirer of beauty, and I believed in making myself look handsome. I was unmarried, and I was a doctor. I felt I had to make my presence felt. I picked up the comb and ran it through my hair and adjusted the parting so that it looked straight and neat. Again, I heard that sound from above. So he's saying that when there's a mirror close by, all of us are tempted. All of us have this temptation. We feel that there's an urge, there's a need inside us to look into the mirror. And he also had the same. So he decided to take a look. And he's saying in those days, so this is a story which happened in the past. So he's telling us that in those days he was a great admirer of beauty and he believed that he had to make himself look handsome. So he wanted himself to be attractive because he was unmarried and he was a doctor. He felt that being a bachelor, unmarried bachelor, and being a doctor also, he had to make his presence felt. He had to, tell people, he had to impress people, not just by being a doctor or an unmarried person, but also by his looks that yes, he is there. He is somebody important. So when he looked at the mirror, he took the comb and he ran it through his hair in order to adjust the parting so that it would look neat and straight. And when he did this, for the next time again, he heard a sound coming from above. Above the ceiling, there must be roof where the rats must be going when they were traveling on the beam. So he hears a sound from there and he is unperturbed because since he's been sharing the room with rats, maybe he's used to this kind of sound, he's familiar, so it doesn't really bother him anymore. I took a close look at my face in the mirror. I made an important decision. I would shave daily and grow a thin mustache to look more handsome. I was after all a bachelor and a doctor. So he says that he made an important decision when he looked at himself in the mirror, and that important decision was to shave daily and to grow a thin mustache so that he could look more handsome. And of course he had to do this. It was an important decision because he was a bachelor and a doctor. So these two things are so very important that one must be particular about their looks. I looked into the mirror and smiled. It was an attractive smile. I made another earth-shaking decision. I would always keep that attractive smile on my face. to look more handsome. I was after all a bachelor and a doctor too. On top of that, again came that noise from above. The first important decision was to shave daily and grow a thin mustache. The next earth-shaking decision, that is again very important decision, is to always have an attractive smile on his face. Again, to look more handsome. And the reasoning he is giving to himself, it is his vanity which is forcing him to be so proud of his appearance is, after all, I'm a bachelor and a doctor too. So he feels that he's important, he's worthy, that he's a bachelor and a doctor. He hears the sound again. I got up, paced up and down the room. Then another lovely thought struck me. I would marry. I would get married to a woman doctor who had plenty of money and a good medical practice. She had to be fat for a valid reason. If I made some silly mistake and needed to run away, she should not be able to run after me and catch me. So this is the humorous element, and we have many more such elements in the story, where instead of telling us one thing plainly in a boring manner, Wacom Muhammad Bashir has added some comical element to make it interesting. And he says here that the doctor, he got up from the chair, he paced up and down the room, he walked up and down the room, and all of a sudden one more thought struck him. It came to his head, and that thought was of marrying someone. He wanted to marry a woman doctor with plenty of money as well as a good medical practice. But the condition that he placed was she had to be fat, and of course for a valid reason. After all, he had to save himself. He's thinking long term, he's thinking about his future, and he says, in case he happens to make a mistake, this fat lady should not be able to run after him, should not be able to catch him, and hence she has to be fat. So here, if we get a question like, what qualities, in fact it should be which quality did the doctor want in his future wife? So our answer to this question would be woman doctor, good medical practice, and the most important one, she has to be rich. Last but not the least, she has to be fat. And we also have to give the reasoning that she should be fat so that in case he makes a mistake, she shouldn't be able to run after him and catch him. So this is what he wanted in his future wife. With such thoughts in my mind, I resumed my seat in the chair in front of the table. There were no more sounds from above. Suddenly, there came a dull thud as if a rubber tube had fallen to the ground. Surely nothing to worry about. Even so, I thought I would turn around and take a look. No sooner had I turned than a fat snake wriggled over the back of the chair and landed on my shoulder. The snake's landing on me and my turning was simultaneous. So he says that he had these thoughts about his future wife in his mind, and with those he sat on the chair in front of the table. So he resumed is to sit again in his seat. And there were no more sounds coming now from above, but he did hear a dull thud. This is a sound, thud is a sound, and though the thud is a sound of something heavy falling somewhere, but in this case it is dull. And it seemed as if a rubber tube had fallen on the ground. And it was nothing to worry about. He was so accustomed to such sounds that he did not pay much attention to it. But he did think that yes, he would turn around and take a look. No sooner had he turned and he found that a fat snake had wriggled over the back of the chair and it had landed on his shoulder. And the moment the snake landed on him and the moment he turned, both happened at the same time. Simultaneous is something to happen at same time. So there are two actions that happened, that is snake's landing on him and him turning. And wriggled is to crawl. He found that the snake had crawled. He says, I didn't jump. I didn't tremble. I didn't cry out. There was no time to do any such thing. The snake slithered along my shoulder and coiled around my left arm above the elbow. The hood was spread out and its head was hardly 3 or 4 inches from my face. Now, when he found that there was a snake on his shoulder, thankfully, he did not jump. He did not tremble. Tremble is to shake with fear. Here it is to shake with fear because the situation was such. And he did not even cry out because there was hardly any time to do any of these things, and the snake slithered along his shoulder and coiled itself around his left arm above the elbow. Slithered is crawling action. It is twisting and crawling action made by the snake. And it coiled around. Coiled is to be in a spiral shape. It was around his arm in a spiral shape. Its hood was spread. Hood is the head. Here it was open head. And it was hardly 3 to 4 inches away from this doctor's face. So it was really close. So he did not have time to act in any of these ways that he mentioned. That is, he couldn't jump, he couldn't tremble, he couldn't cry out, he couldn't do any of these things. I would not be correct to say merely that I sat there holding my breath. I was turned to stone. But my mind was very active. The door opened into darkness. The room was surrounded by darkness. In the light of the lamp, I sat there like a stone image in the flesh. He says that it would not be correct to say that he simply sat there holding his breath. He was scared, though he did not jump, tremble, or cry out. He definitely was scared. He was frightened at that moment, and it was so that he was only able to hold his breath, and he had turned to stone. It seemed as if he couldn't make any sort of movement, but his mind was active. Thankfully, his body did not move, but his mind was active. He says that the door opened into darkness, since it was an unelectrified house or the room where he stayed. There was light only of the lamp which was kept on the table, and he sat there like a stone image in the flesh. He was so still that he resembled a stone, but he was still living. He was still a live human being, and hence stone image in the flesh. So here we get to know how frightened doctor was. Frightened he was. He didn't do anything, but mind was active. I felt then the great presence of the creator of this world and this universe. God was there. Suppose I said something and he did not like it. I tried in my imagination to write in bright letters outside my little heart the words, "Oh God." So it is at this moment of need, of help, he felt the presence of the creator of this world and universe. He felt the presence of the creator. So if we ask a question that when did the doctor feel God's presence, our answer would be when he found himself to be coiled by a snake. And at that moment, he couldn't move because of fear. Despite his mind being active, he couldn't do anything. And it's then he felt his creator's presence. He felt the presence of the creator of this world and universe, and he knew that he was out there. And he thought to himself that suppose if he said something and God did not like anything, he couldn't afford himself to be in that situation. Here, he wanted God to be by his side because where he is right now, he needs his presence. He needs his help the most right now. So he couldn't afford to make God dislike him for anything that he thought. So he tried in his imagination, since his mind was very active, he thought and he tried to write in bright letters so that it could attract attention. And he tried to write outside his little heart the words, "Oh God." It was the safest bet at that time. He couldn't afford to not have God by his side. So, to be on a safer side, to be on a place where he's not disliked and that he could get God's help, he thought of, "Oh God," to be written outside his heart in bright letters. There was some pain in my left arm. It was as if a thick leaden rod, no, a rod made of molten fire, was slowly but powerfully crushing my arm. The arm was beginning to be drained of all strength. What could I do? He said that when he found that a snake had coiled itself around his left arm, he felt some pain. And he felt as if there was a thick leaden rod. No, no, no. It was a rod of molten fire. That is, molten is to be in a melted state. It was crushing it, though it was a slow process, but it was powerful. It was crushing his arm. And the arm was beginning to be drained of all strength. It started to feel as if it was numb, as if he had no strength, as if it had stopped the blood flow. And at that moment, what could he do? He's questioning. maybe he's thinking of ways to save himself, but it was so powerful that he felt crushed. He felt his arm had no strength, and as if it was molten fire, as if it was so powerful but slow that he had no strength left. He felt powerless right now. This is in contrast with the powerful crushing. At my slightest movement, the snake would strike me. Death lurked 4 inches away. Suppose it struck. What was the medicine I had to take? There were no medicines in the room. I was but a poor, foolish, and stupid doctor. I forgot my danger and smiled feebly at myself. Feebly is weakly, lurked is hid. So he says that if he made even the slightest movement, even smallest of small movement, he knew that he would be struck by the snake. And it was death, instant death that could have happened. It lurked just 4 inches away, since the hood of the snake was 4 inches away. It seemed as if death was hiding behind it. And suppose it did strike him. He's thinking to himself, he's coming up with ways to save himself, and he thinks that if suppose it happens, what would he do? What medicine would he take? There were no medicines in the room. He comes to a realization there were no medicines at that time in the room that could have saved him. And it is at this moment that he forgot about his vanity, and he realized how poor, foolish, and stupid a doctor he was. He forgot his danger immediately and tried to smile weakly at himself. Feebly is weakly. It seemed as if God appreciated that. The snake turned its head. It looked into the mirror and saw its reflection. I do not claim that it was the first snake that had ever looked into a mirror, but it was certain that the snake was looking into the mirror. Was it admiring its own beauty? Was it trying to make an important decision about growing a mustache or using eyeshadow and mascara or wearing a vermilion spot on its forehead? He thinks that it is God who has punished him by putting him in this danger. Because now when he realizes how poor, stupid, and foolish he is, he feels that God appreciates it, because it is at this moment that the snake turns its head. And it turns because it looks into the mirror that was kept on the table, and he sees its own reflection. And though the doctor says that though he cannot claim that it was the first snake that had ever looked itself into the mirror, but one thing he was certain about, one thing he was sure about, was that the snake was indeed looking into the mirror. And he thinks, now again it is a humorous element, he thinks that was it admiring its own beauty? Was the snake charmed by its own beauty? Or was it also trying to make an important decision, just the way the doctor had, the way he had made an important decision as well as an earth-shaking decision? And for him, he thinks, for the snake, the doctor thinks that important decision could be about growing a mustache, or using an eyeshadow, or wearing a mascara, or a vermilion spot on its forehead. So these are things, eyeshadow, mascara, and vermilion spot. These three are things of cosmetic things which girls use mostly. Vermilion spot could either be a bindi, which females use here in the center of the forehead. It could also be a sindoor, and vermilion means a bright scarlet color, red color. So it was thinking that probably it wanted to do all of those things, and the doctor was telling us on the snake's behalf as to what probable questions it could have had in its mind when it was charmed by its own beauty, when it was looking at its own reflection in the mirror. I did not know anything for certain. What sex was the snake? Was it male or female? I will never know. For the snake unwound itself from my arm and slowly slithered into my lap. From there it crept onto the table and moved towards the mirror. Perhaps it wanted to enjoy its reflection at close quarters. I was no mere image cut in granite. I was suddenly a man of flesh and blood. Still holding my breath, I got up from the chair. I quietly went out through the door into the veranda. From there, I leapt into the yard and ran for all I was worth. Each of us heaved a sigh of relief. Somebody asked, "Doctor, is your wife very fat?" So now he tells us that it didn't know, the doctor didn't know what the snake was thinking for sure, for certain. It did not even know what the sex of the snake was. If it was a male snake or a female snake, he would never know. But the snake unwound itself, the snake uncoiled itself from the doctor's arm and slowly slithered, slowly came into his lap. And from there it crept, from there it crawled, or it moved on to the table. It moved towards the mirror. The doctor is thinking perhaps the snake wanted to be close to its reflection. It wanted to enjoy its reflection as close quarters, that is from a close distance. And doctor himself was not an image anymore cut in granite. Granite is a kind of stone used in construction. He was suddenly a man of flesh and blood. He was suddenly himself. He could feel that he didn't have to be still anymore. He could make movements because the snake was not on his body anymore. The snake had moved on to the table. He was still holding his breath. He still wanted to be as quiet as possible when he got up from the chair. And from there, he went quietly through the veranda, through the door into the veranda, and he leapt into the yard. Yard is an open garden or a veranda. And he ran for all I was worth. He ran as he could, as fast as he could. And when he comes to this part of the story, his listeners all heave a sigh of relief. They breathe in a way that they felt relaxed because they were all attentively listening to the story. And when you listen to such kind of stories, you are so rapt that you can feel those emotions that the characters in the stories feel. So maybe all these listeners were also so interested, they were also so engrossed into the narrative that they also felt the tension. They also felt this frightening moment that the doctor went through. And after they finally got to know that he was saved, they heaved a sigh of relief. And somebody from that audience, somebody from that group of listeners asked him a question. And the question was, Doctor, is your wife very fat? No, the doctor said. God willed otherwise. My life companion is a thin, reedy person with the gift of a sprinter. She's not fat, is what the doctor says. And he says that God did not want to give me the wish that I wanted. In fact, his companion, his life companion, his wife, is a thin person and she is reedy. Reedy is being as thin as a, a blade of grass blade. That is one single thin, long piece of grass. It is as good as that. And his wife had the gift of a sprinter. Sprinter is a runner, a person who runs very fast. So it is entirely opposite of what he wanted in his wife. Someone else asked, Doctor, when you ran, did the snake follow you? Now the person is trying to bring the doctor back to the story and asked a question that when the doctor ran, did the snake also follow him? The doctor replied, I ran and ran till I reached a friend's house. Immediately, I smeared oil all over myself and took a bath. I changed into fresh clothes. The next morning at about 8:30, I took my friend and one or two others to my room to move my things from there. But we found we had little to carry. Some thief had removed most of my things. The room had been cleaned out, but not really. The thief had left behind one thing as a final insult. What was that? I asked. Finally, we have a question that the narrator asks. The doctor said, my vest, the dirty one. The fellow had such a sense of cleanliness, the rascal could have taken it and used it after washing it with soap and water. So when the doctor was asked if he was followed by the snake when he was running, he replies that he ran till the time he reached one of his friend's house and immediately he covered himself with oil. Smeared is covered himself with oil and took a bath. He changed into fresh clothes and the next morning at 8:30 or around about 8:30, he went to his room with one of his friends and one or two other people in order to move his things from there. He didn't want to stay in the same place again, but he found that he had little to carry. There was next to nothing that was there in his room now because a thief had removed most of his things. A thief must have come and must have taken away, must have stolen all of his things, and the room had been cleaned out. There was a thief who came and stole all his belongings. But the one thing that the thief had left, that is his vest, the dirty one that he had hung up the previous night, he left it as a final insult. And the doctor was the doctor did not like it at all, and he said that the fellow could have taken it, the rascal. He uses bad word for the thief and says that also could have been used by the thief if he had washed it with soap and water. Did you see the snake the next day, doctor? The doctor laughed. I have never seen it since. It was a snake which was taken with its own beauty. Taken with is attracted by. So when somebody had asked if he had seen the same doctor, the doctor replies that no, he did not, but it was one snake that was taken with its beauty. The one snake which was attracted, charmed, enamored by its own beauty, and that he had not probably seen in his life till he was there with these listeners telling about this event. So we see how one small event of somebody finding themselves in such a situation is narrated in such a humorous way that we feel engrossed. We feel as if we are a part of the story, and we ourselves get these questions in our minds which these listeners ask, and it is an interesting fact to know that animals indeed enjoy their own reflections. It's not just in this story. If you would look it up, you would find many instances where animals have found themselves to be charmed when they've found mirrors in their hands or close by, and they've been attracted to it, and they've liked enjoying themselves when they looked into the mirror. With this, we come to an end, and here we get to know that this story was written in Malayalam. It was translated by V. Abdullah. So, Muhammad Bashir's style of writing, as I had told you, down to earth style, can be seen in this story as well. His language is very simple, it is very relatable, even a layman can understand, and it is interesting. The main important part of a story to make it interesting so that the listeners are engrossed is what we can find here. It's a humorous story, it keeps you bound, it keeps you at one place, it keeps you questioning as to what would follow, what would happen, and this is what made him famous. This is what made him popular, not just among the readers, but his critics as well. Everyone enjoyed his short stories or novels that he wrote. Thank you.